What exactly is the Israel lobby? It's a loose coalition of individuals and groups who work openly to influence U.S. foreign policy in a pro-Israel direction. It's not a centralized organization, and the groups that make up the lobby do not agree on every issue. It includes organizations like AIPAC, the Anti-Defamation League, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the Zionist Organization of America, and Christians United for Israel, just to name a few. It also includes think tanks like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the American Enterprise Institute, and publications like the Weekly Standard and the New Republic. This is a broad definition, but most special interest groups in the United States have different components. The environmental movement, for example, is not just Greenpeace or the Sierra Club. It also includes research groups, sympathetic local organizations, academics, journalists, just like the pro-Israel movement does. It certainly is not a cabal or a conspiracy that controls U.S. foreign policy. Rather, it is an especially powerful interest group like the National Rifle Association, the Farm Lobby, the Cuban Lobby, and the AARP. And it operates the same way that those other interest groups do. Its actions, in short, are as American as apple pie. Very importantly, the lobby is not synonymous with Jewish Americans. Surveys suggest that about a third of American Jews do not care much about Israel. Others do not support the lobby's positions, and some groups that work on Israel's behalf, such as the so-called Christian Zionists, are not Jewish. In short, the lobby is defined by its political agenda, not by ethnicity or religion. The lobby also does not include individuals who simply have a favorable attitude towards Israel. Rather, one has to actively work to try to shape U.S. policy in a pro-Israel direction. Obviously, some groups and individuals are more active and influential than others, although there is no question that overall, the lobby has gotten the relationship between the United States and Israel that it wants. To put it succinctly, the United States has a special relationship with Israel that has no parallel in American history. Indeed, as the late Yitzhak Rabin once said, U.S. support for Israel is, quote, beyond compare in modern history. What makes the relationship special is the sheer amount of support that we give Israel and the fact that we give it unconditionally. The Jewish state is the largest recipient of U.S. economic and military aid, about $500 per year per Israeli, even though it is a prosperous country with a per capita income that the World Bank ranks 27th in the world. Since the end of World War II, Israel has received more foreign aid than any other country. Israel also gets consistent diplomatic backing from the United States, and we almost always take Israel's side in regional disputes. For example, since 1972, the United States has vetoed 42 UN security resolutions that were critical of Israel, which is greater than the combined total of all the vetoes cast by the other Security Council members for the same period. Most importantly, however, that aid is given unconditionally. In other words, Israel gets this aid even when it does things that the United States opposes, like building settlements in the occupied territories. Furthermore, Israel is rarely ever criticized by U.S. officials, and certainly not by anyone who aspires to high political office. Almost all of our critics acknowledge that there is a lobby, but they either argue that it is not very powerful, or that Steve Walt and I are saying it is all-powerful and it controls U.S. Middle East policy. To be clear, we explicitly say that the lobby is not all-powerful and that it does not control U.S. Middle East policy. Instead, we argue that it is very powerful and has a marked influence on American foreign policy. Indeed, when you look carefully at all the evidence, there is little doubt that the Israel lobby is an especially powerful interest group, which again is perfectly legitimate in the American political system. Consider AIPAC, which is just one of the many organizations in the lobby, although surely the most influential one. AIPAC was ranked number 2 in a 2005 National Journal survey of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, and ranked 2nd in a 1997 survey by Fortune magazine. Bill Clinton said that AIPAC was, quote, better than anyone else lobbying in this town. And Newt Gingrich, who rarely agrees with Bill Clinton about anything, said it was, quote, the most effective general interest group across the entire planet. Former Congressman Lee Hamilton, who served in Congress for 34 years, said, quote, there's no group that matches it. They're in a class by themselves. Former Senator Fritz Hollings said, as he was leaving office, quote, you can't have an Israel policy other than what AIPAC gives you. Stephen Rosen, the AIPAC official who is now under indictment for passing classified information, once put a napkin in front of Jeffrey Goldberg, who was then a journalist for The New Yorker, and said, quote, in 24 hours we could have the signature of 70 senators on this napkin. And Goldberg, who wrote one of the most vicious reviews of our book, calls AIPAC a leviathan among lobbies. Speaking of our critics, I might note that Alan Dershowitz said that, quote, my generation of Jews became part of what is the most effective lobbying and fundraising effort in the history of democracy. Thus, it is hardly surprising that the outgoing Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, said in the wake of the 2006 Lebanon war, thank God we have AIPAC, the greatest supporter and friend we have in the whole world.